Thank you. It has been such an incredibly wonderful ride here, and we are so fortunate to be able to have Jack Whitten and Kellie Jones with us today. Before I begin, I wanted to offer the Blantons incredible thanks just to a few folks. Jeannie and Michael Klein, Alec Rhodes, Chase Nancy and Bob Inman, Melissa Jones, Regina Rogers, the Texas Commission on the Arts, and Humanities Texas for their incredibly generous support of witness art and civil rights in the 60s. I'd also like to give my special thanks and a hats off to Adam Bennett, Mary Myers, Vivian Lynn, and Ray Williams for their incredible work and for coordinating such a spectacular and rare event for us here at the Blanton. I also want to thank Alexander Gray of Alexander Gray Associates in New York for his exceptional support of this project and of Jack's work. We're very fortunate to have Alex with us this afternoon. Dr. Kellie Jones is Associate Professor in Art History and Archaeology and the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University. Her research interests include African American and African diaspora artists, Latino and Latin American artists, and issues in contemporary art and museum theory. Dr. Jones has received numerous awards for her work, including a Creative Capital Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant and a term as a scholar in residence at the Terra Foundation for American Art in Europe and Giverny, France, both in 2013. Dr. Jones has also worked as a curator for over 3 decades and has numerous major national and international exhibits to her credit. Her exhibition, Now Dig This, Art and Black Los Angeles 1960 through 1980 at the Hammer Museum, Los Angeles, was named one of the best exhibitions of 2011 and 2012 by Art Forum, and Best Thematic Show nationally by the International Association of Art Critics. She is the co-curator of Witness, Art and Civil Rights in the 60s, which celebrates the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. Currently on view at the Blanton Museum. For 50 years, Jack Whitten has explored the possibilities of paint, the role of the artist, and the allure of material essence in his innovative studio process. With compositions that are abstract, Whitten foregrounds the material properties of paint, pigmentation, viscosity, and mark, to capture the momentary and suggest the enduring. Born in Bessemer, Alabama in 1939, Whitten was an active participant in the civil rights movement before moving to New York City in the early 1960s, where he enrolled at Cooper Union and discovered his own experimental language of abstraction. Across the decades, he has continually been an artist of his moment, due precisely to his respect for the past and commitment to the present. Whitten's poetic and physically compelling compositions reinvent the medium of painting time and time again, from his series of small ghost paintings of the 1960s, his smeared test labs and dragged canvases of the 1970s, and his collaged acrylic skins of the 1980s, to his more recent tessellated constructions of paint tiles. Noted for raucous colors and density of gesture combined with topical content, his artworks of the 1960s manifests emotionally complex meditations on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Civil Rights Movement, and the Vietnam War. Experimentation turned to abstraction for Whitten in the 1970s. A new method of painting developed, one that resonates more closely with photography. A gesture is removed from the making of the work. The paint and canvas are processed, produced from large troughs of paint dragged across the canvas with tools including squeegees, rakes, and afro combs. Since the 1990s, Whitten experiments with paint as a medium have progressed further towards sculpture, beginning with transforming paint compounds into tiles, applying them to the canvas as mosaics. These artworks allude to ancient architecture and murals, and serve as both an homage to and memorial of celebrated public figures and intimate friends. Recently, Whitten has repurposed the gamut of techniques he developed over the decades to deepen his engagement with art history. His work has been exhibited in the 1969 and 1972 Whitney Annuals and at the Whitney Museum of Art, and a landmark 1974 solo exhibition at the Whitney. Recently, Whitten's work has been featured at the Brooklyn Museum, the 55th Venice Biennale, In Italy, the Aldridge Contemporary Art Museum, the Rose Museum at Brandeis University, Savannah College of Art and Design, Atlanta Contemporary Art Center, MoMA PS1 in New York, and the Studio Museum in Harlem, among others. In September 2014, the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego presented Whitten's first major career retrospective, Jack Whitten, 5 Decades of Painting, and will travel to the Wexner Center for the Arts at Ohio State University in May and to the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis in September. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my incredible pleasure to introduce Dr. Kellie Jones and artist Jack Whitten.
Austin. We are so happy to be here and so happy that Witness is here. I've been here several times and it's always great to be back in this city. So we will get started right away with our questions because we probably have too many for Jack to answer in this time period, but we're going to make a stab at it. So Jack.
Yes, Kellie.
Can you talk about how your experiences living in the South contributed to your decision to become an artist?
I can talk about it, but I can tell you now it's going to take a while, if you don't mind. Bear with me.
Go ahead.
I should start at 1960 when I entered art school at Cooper Union as a freshman in 1960. Cooper Union had a world-class art library, and my favorite thing to do was to browse through the library and just look at any book I wanted to. I practically devoured every book in the library. One day while browsing, I came across a little book by a British art historian. His name was Sir Herbert Reed. It was Ideas in Modern Art. I said, it looks kind of interesting. Thought I would pick it up, read it. He made this introduction where he used the coin as a metaphor. He says art is like a coin, heads and tails. On the one side of that coin is sensibility, and on the other side of that coin is plasticity. I said, wow, that makes a lot of sense to me. Before coming to Cooper Union, I had never sat in a classroom next to a white student. Never. I had never had a white instructor. In truth, up to that point, I had tried to avoid white people at any cost. It was a matter of survival growing up in the South. And fortunate for us, the older people protected us as best they could. Your question, growing up in the South, I realized that my whole sensibility was formed by growing up in the South. I'm truly a Southerner. I was born there all through grade school, high school, my first years of college at Tuskegee Institute, and at Southern University in Baton Rouge. It's all Southern. So for me to explain sensibility, your question is right on the money. I grew up in 100% total American apartheid. There's no other way to put it. It's no other way to put it. Totally 100% American apartheid. Everything was separated. The whole concept of separate but equal was a cruel joke. I have no memory whatsoever of nothing being equal. Nothing. Every aspect of our lives were dictated by white people. Employment, all forms of economics. Transportation, when you see those photographs of the signs which says colored and white, I grew up with that. The city bus, there was a sign, the front of the bus said white, the back said colored, and you were not allowed to remove that sign. In truth, one of my memories from childhood is the death of a young man, the Hood family. He came home from the Army with his uniform on, and one day he boarded the bus and he removed the sign to take a seat. The bus driver pulled out a pistol and killed this young man. Now, I have memories of the hearse moving through the black neighborhoods. They did it purposely, of a flag-draped coffin. And the people in the neighborhoods made sure that it went through all the black neighborhoods, that flag-draped coffin. I remember that. A lot of stuff that I witnessed growing up in the South, I don't even mention because it's like, how much weight can one bear from memory? There's a limit. There's a limit. Everything. We had a park in Bessemer, Alabama. The only shaded spot in the whole town, really. We could walk through that park, but we could not sit down. And God forbid, there was a water fountain. You didn't go near that. I think Alabama in the summertime is hot. I mean, you sweat. The humidity is can be 80, 90 degrees, humidity. Bessemer, we had a lake, West Lake we call it. It's a large lake. There was a roadway that passed through the middle of the lake with a bridge. We could walk and stop at that bridge, and we had to look from a distance at all the white kids having fun with their water slides, their floats. We couldn't go there. We had to stand on the bridge. My brothers and I and my buddies, we were into fishing. I could look at the fish, but I couldn't fish for them. But my good buddy J.D. and I would sneak in the back. And we developed a technique we call tight line. It's a form of fishing with a cane pole that we cut ourselves, by the way. And we'd fish for bluegills. I often tell the story. I was never in the Army. I never went to Vietnam. I've never been into combat. But I know what the sound of a bullet sounds like when it passes over your head. There were signs in the back there where we used to sneak in which said, "No niggers allowed." That's the way it was put. But we would sneak in anyway. There's a lot of incidents like that. There was a swimming pool in Bessemer. We could pass by and watch, but we could not participate. Now, this was owned by the city. This was taxpayers' money.
Did they have any black swimming days, Negro swimming days?
No, absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. Didn't exist. We had one public pool on the other side of town in Birmingham in a place we called Tuxedo Junction. And they would put us on a bus and we would go all the way across town into Birmingham, and there, overcrowded, that's the time. My older brothers and some of the older boys in the neighborhood dammed up Parsons Creek. Parsons Creek was a creek that I used to fish in. My older brothers dammed it with logs and wood and made us a swimming pool. It was a lot of fun. I have some great memories. We had a classic car tie hanging from a rope from a tree that we would climb in, swing in, drop. It was a lot of fun. But evidently for the white folks, it was too much fun. One night, they came in and they dropped tons of broken bottles into our swimming pool. Now, unbeknownst to us, the first kid who jumped in the next morning came out with bloody feet. That kind of a thing. And those kinds of stories, the stories I'm telling you now, are quite mild. Very, very mild.
There's another story that you have about the library.
Yes.
You started out talking about the library at Cooper Union, so I
Right.
think it would be interesting to tell people. I mean, you talked about that library I mean, there's a lot of students who talk about going to the library and being in love with it, but I think your story about libraries in the South will put that in another context if you can tell that story.
There was a building in Bessemer, Alabama, a very imposing building. I remember very big white pillars, brick structure, quite an amazing building in my little mind. And I never knew what went on in that building. My mom allowed me to go downtown to visit my Aunt Lina. She and her husband owned a restaurant called Hall's Cafe. Anybody from Bessemer during the 40s would know Hall's Cafe. That was my aunt's place. And on the way home, I decided, I must have been 8 years old, I wanted to peep into that building and see what it was. And I remember pulling myself up on the windows and peeping inside. What I saw was whole walls of books. I became so excited. There were people sitting at the tables and chairs, these very nice tables, reading. I lowered myself down, and I think I ran all the way back home. And I ran home, and I told my mom what I saw. She went into a fury. She cursed. She hollered at me. She says, "You have to promise me never to do that again. Don't you understand? Those people will kill you. Don't you ever do that again." It was the public library, the Carnegie Library. But we couldn't go. There was no library. But before I graduated Dunbar High School, maybe about the 10th year, people in Bessemer took it upon themselves to make the Bessemer Colored Library. And it was a small room about, at the most, 10 feet square. And they had given a few books. And there we could go and read a book. I mean, it's an unbelievable story. I mean, it's something you take for granted today, being able to go to the library, but...
To the public library.
Yes.
Well, we'll switch a little bit and talk about your time at Tuskegee, just briefly, to talk about how George Washington Carver fits into the story of you becoming an artist.
George Washington Carver fits in even before I went to Tuskegee. One thing about the black schools, I must say, in the classrooms we had large-scale photographic reproductions of important black people. George Washington Carver's photo was one of those people that they had on the walls. I remember that. I remember photographs of Frederick Douglass on the wall. Lawrence Dunbar, the poet, my high school was named after him, Dunbar High School. That was my first introduction. I was the first in my family, by the way, to leave high school and go to college. I was good in the sciences, so I got scholarships to Tuskegee on a work scholarship program. And do you know at Tuskegee we have the George Washington Carver Museum? It's set up in a way, his whole laboratory is there, just the way he left it. If you're ever at Tuskegee Institute, it's well worth your visit to go to George Washington Carver Museum. A lot of people don't know it, but George Washington Carver was also a painter. He painted. He did a lot of still lifes, landscapes, some portraitures. And he actually made his own paints. Now, because of my work scholarship program, the one man, an older man, I did janitorial services at Tuskegee. That's how I got through school. I was a janitor. I had to clean George Washington Carver's museum one day because this man was sick. And I remember picking up and cleaning and dusting a lot of his artifacts that was left behind. It was quite touching. It was so moving. I think that my whole emphasis is upon experimentation came as a direct result of the experiences at the George Washington Carver Museum, that man's legacy. I think that's what started it.
Well, speaking of experimentation, let's think about this painting, or this, I'm calling it an assemblage behind us. It's actually upstairs or across the way in the museum. So I encourage people to go see the actual work. I always feel funny showing a work that's actually on view on a slide, but we're going to do it. There are two pieces of yours in Witness, and this is one, Birmingham, 1964, more of assemblage. Were you experimenting with that form at the time, or is it something particularly inspired by the events in Birmingham?
I was experimenting with rags, making collages out of rags. I had just about coming out of Cooper Union. That was 64. I was at Cooper for 4 years. I knew Bob Rauschenberg personally, and I was very much aware of his work, and I was very much aware of his work in assemblage and in collage. I had been acquainted with Joseph Cornell's works, the boxes. So I did some experimentation. What's good about collage is the immediacy of it. I think any artist will tell you that. This subject in particular, what was different, a lot of the horrors that happened during the civil rights movement that we know of. What was different about this was, it happened in my hometown, damn it. When those kids were bombed at the church, it happened in my hometown. That's what was different. Death has a way too easily to be generalized. You know, we read over newspapers, we hear 54 people killed in a bombing, 150 people killed in a bombing. It's shocking. And I think all of us would agree. These are shocking things. But it's something about death. When it happens close to you, and when you have to deal with it, it makes it different. It moves from the general to the particular. I flipped. I flipped. I knew I had to do something immediately. In situations like that, you know, I think especially for the artist, you're trying to stay in your studio, you're trying to do, and then all of a sudden something comes in, something happens, and then what does one do? I was so disturbed. It was such a horrible, horrible, horrible thing for me. I was ready to jump on a bus. Hell, I grew up with guns. I'm a good shot. I went squirrel hunting with a single shot 22. I found out that one shot was all I needed, and it didn't destroy the meat, you know. Other people were shooting squirrels with double barrel shotguns, 12 gauge, number 3, number 4 shells, the biggest spatter. All I needed was one shot. So I'm thinking, what should I do? And this was a difficult decision for me. You know, I had just met Alan Stone, who gave me my first shot, and he understood the dilemma I was into, but Alan kept hollering at me after in 1964, 65, even up through 68. Alan insisted. I would go to him, and I would be falling apart, crying, yelling, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to go find some guns. And Alan would look at me and he would say, you're a painter, damn it, you're a painter. The most difficult decisions to make during that period was staying in the studio. That was the hard thing to do. That was the hard thing to do, to stay in the studio. I think in that show out there, I would like to say that, and I think I would be correct. I think all those artists, black and white, were experiencing that. It was the same. You have a great show out there, and what's great about that show is you have black artists responding, you have white artists responding. You have women responding. This was a subject in America that touched everybody. And it still touches everybody. You know, we're talking about an issue that's unresolved. It still touches everybody.
Well, let's look at the other painting that's in the show. Again, you all who haven't seen it, go see it. Jack Whitten's King's Wish, Martin Luther's Dream from 1968. So you've changed from a kind of assemblage style here, so using newspaper, and stockings, and tinfoil, and then gone to painting. And so what is, what happens in between these? I mean, you moved back to a strictly painted surface. Did you see painting as a more useful way to deal with things you were thinking about or experiencing at the time? You talk about the assemblage being immediate, but what changes when you move to working in painting, dealing with these ideas?
Right after the little piece that's in your show, the Birmingham 64 pieces, just got out of art school, I did a group of process paintings, all black and white. They look like fuzzy photographs. That's what they look like. They were made by stretching a piece of number 10 cotton duck, prime, putting down black and white acrylic pigment, and stretching a piece of mesh, nylon mesh, silk mesh, on top of that, and wiping off the excess. They were very fuzzy, photographic looking. I got a little carried away with that. It started messing with my head, because I went around for a while thinking I was a camera. And when that starts happening, you feel your equilibrium being a little, hey, wait a minute here, And I wrote something on my studio wall during that time which said, the image is photographic, therefore I must photograph my thought. I thought I was a camera and that I could do photographic images right out of the paint. I met Alan Stone, who gave me my first shot in '65. Alan's feeling was that they're interesting, but they're not painting. And I was he was offering me my first one-man show. Now, you have to remember, as an art student, my love was Bill de Kooning, Norman Lewis, Romeo Bearden, Franz Klein, Philip Guston. These are people that I actually knew. Bill de Kooning in particular, I would follow him around like a little puppy. And my hand was trained by gestural abstraction. By 1968, as all of you know, here in America, things were heating up. That's why the palette changed. That's a hot palette. Any of you out there who are artists and have worked with the palette when it hits that hot temperature of reds, oranges, yellows, you know what I'm talking about. There's an emotional appeal there that's different from other ranges of color. Those are not tonal paintings. Those are hot paintings. Things were heating up in America. By that time, we had experienced, 4 assassinations. The height of the Vietnam War. We were seeing horrible, horrible, horrible images. We had seen things from World War II. But it was something about seeing that on TV right there happening made it different. It hit home. All of us were experiencing all kinds of pressures. Now, we speak of the civil rights movement, but we have to realize it wasn't just the civil rights movement that was affecting us at that time. And myself, as a young man, I even had the women on my back. The women are yelling. Feminism was breaking out, I was good friends with Kate Millett at that time. Kate Millett would holler at me. Kate Millett straightened my ass out on more than one thing. So there was a lot of pressures being applied. All I'm saying is that going back to sensibility and plasticity, events and things around you, the environment that you are, shape what you are doing. That hot palette came out because of the environment that it took place in precisely at that time in history. It had to be hot. We're talking blood. That's what's happening. Okay, the painting, Martin Luther's Wish. I met Martin Luther when I was a freshman during the height of the bus boycott in Montgomery. I went there. Tuskegee was playing Alabama State, and I was in the marching band. I had to be in Montgomery, and I heard that King was speaking, so I took time off and went over to meet him. I only met him that one time at the church in Montgomery. That would be the fall of 1957. Made a great impression upon me. It's amazing how all this stuff comes together at some point, you know. So many intense experiences and knowing and meeting so many people. I've been fortunate in a way of meeting and knowing a lot of people who have given me a lot of, good information.
Well, I like this one a lot because one of the challenges in doing this show is that I didn't want it to be all about violence, right? Because what people wanted to do was change the world, and they were seeing visions of the way the world should be. So I really liked this one because it was King's wish. It was a wish.
Yes.
It was a dream. But then, of course, Jack reminded me about this one, USA Oracle, the assassination of M.L. King. So there's a little bit something different. I mean, you're talking about here, this is very hot. This is very, the hot colors, hot time, a lot of stuff going on. I didn't particularly read it like that until you said that, which of course is true, but this one seems even more ominous, obviously.
When I met King in 57, again, he made a great impression upon me as a young person. The March on Washington, I was there in that crowd. I was right down there at the base of where he was speaking. A bunch of us from New York went there. Yes, I heard the dream. I heard the speech. I was there. I heard it. At the same time, there was something not right about it to me. There was a lot of skepticism, a lot of things that I just did not believe. The old folks used to say at home when things got really bad in Alabama, to comfort us, they would say, well, their kids will be better. That was the hope. You're experiencing this now, but their kids will be better. That was a hope that was given to us. And we believed in that. When King spoke, the hope was there. Somehow in my young mind, I was still skeptical of it. There was a lot of doubt. A lot of doubt. There was joy in hearing the speech and hearing someone say that, but at the same time, I had a lot of contradictions about what he was saying. So it's a lot of contradictions driving that painting. There's a lot of doubt driving that painting. Yeah. Now, the assassination paintings, by the way, these paintings are part of a whole series. There must be, that could be, I don't know, Alex, how many do you think? 10, 12 paintings? Yeah, we lost some of them in a fire. It must have been at least 8 of them, though. That's part of a series, all in dedication to Martin Luther King. And not mere dedications. There's a long narrative there. It's more than just a dedication. There's a narrative there.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like you're working with the idea of your doubt, your skepticism, your hopes throughout the series. I mean, that's what it seems as the idea of the oracle is, somebody who's this kind of all-seeing figure in a way.
The oracle is, historically, throughout history, people have always had and believed in oracles, There are two assassination paintings. This painting happened before the assassination. I saw it. I knew something was coming down. Hence the white crab. I knew it was something horrifically evil coming down. And then the second assassination painting is after the assassination. When the shit came together and I realized that my feelings were correct, I did the second one when the news hit. I have no explanation for things like that. Throughout my career as a painter, images have surfaced like that. I have no explanation for it. I try not to make a big deal out of it, but it's something that I'm aware of.
Well, let's move to what happened next, which was you get to the 70s.
Oh, the Siberian sword grinder.
Siberian sword grinder. Thank you, Alec. You know, these are paintings that have been much discussed for other reasons, and, you know, so how do you get from, you know, this to that?
Well, there's a lot in between now before we got to Siberian sword grinder. Siberian sword grinder is about, what, 74, 75? 74. Yeah, 74.
Now at MoMA?
Yeah, it's on view now at MoMA. 1970 was a big turning point for me, big time. I realized that I love Bill de Kooning too much. I remember I was bold. I would walk into the bar, be some older painter there, and I would walk up to him and say, "Hey man, I've seen your work. I like it. I would like for you to come to my studio." I would do that shit. Once I invited a painter in, his name was Lawrence Calcado. He walked into the studio, he looks around, listening to me, yap, 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 and I'm waxing what I'm doing and so forth. And all of a sudden Lawrence says, "Oh my God, boy, you got some nice de Koonings here." Yeah, you got some nice de Koonings here. I realized that I had to do something. I had to do something to erase Bill de Kooning's hand. My studio became a laboratory. I built myself a large drawing board on the floor. It was big. It was like 12 feet by 20 feet. It was built out of 2x4s, 16-inch centers, honeycomb, covered with 3/4-inch construction-grade plywood. On top of that, I put a industrial linoleum that covered the whole thing. It was built absolutely level and square. It was a drawing board, a giant drawing board. And I developed a tool which I call a developer, using the photographic term. I realized that something from 1964 and those first black and white photographic-like paintings I did, I had to go back into that. Total process, experimentation, systemic conceptualized works. My first intention was to be able to lay down an even 1/4-inch slab of acrylic paint, something that I could measure at 1/4 of an inch. Something that I could measure at 3/8 of an inch. Now, my background is mostly into carpentry, so a lot of times when I talk about painting, I talk about principles that we use in carpentry, right? I managed to lay that slab down using this developer. At that time, I had a very decent afro, not as large as yours, as I remember. But it was decent. And as you know, we kept our picks in our hair. That's the way we always carried around, right? So one day I had laid down one of these slabs, and for some reason I pulled out my afro comb. I said, "Look, that's a pretty good tool." And I started scratching through the slab. Lo and behold, I found that with the afro comb, I could pick up the light that was down underneath the surface. I said, well, that's kind of interesting. I did a few of those. My Afro comb worked so well, I said to myself, my God, what will my carpenter saw do? So I took the handle off my carpenter saw and made it into a tool for me to cut through the paint. And then with the developer, I says, well, that's kind of interesting. I attached a piece of rubber, heavy duty, 3/8 of an inch neoprene rubber. This allowed me to lay down a whole slab of paint covering the whole plane. The idea conceptually was what I call non-relational thinking in painting. In my mind, in art history, up to that point, all painting had been relational, meaning that the artist put down a brushstroke, a second brushstroke answered the first one, a third one, a fourth one, and so on. Step after step after step after step. It was all relational. That's the way you dealt with it. My idea was to, and by the way, I don't mind admitting it, the clue came from meeting Ed Reinhardt. Norman had introduced me to Ed Reinhardt.
Norman Lewis.
Yeah. And Reinhardt actually wrote about non-relational. In his black paintings, he referred to them as that's what he was doing. What bothered me about, I accepted what he was saying, but what bothered me with those black paintings is that it still had that damn cross in it. And within the cross, I still saw it as relational. And I knew that I had to go a step further in non-relational thought. But originally, the idea came from Ed. So when the developer would hit, the whole canvas was conceived of as one line, one gesture. The whole picture plane was a line. That's how I got around Bill de Kooning. At that point, I remember going to the bar, having a good, steady scotch and saying bye-bye. I knew that I had gotten around Bill. I had erased the notion of relational gesture. The whole picture plane became one gesture. Siberian sword grinder, you know, there's a politics to this painting. This is the time, historically, we're at the height of the Cold War. We knew, by then we knew what was happening in Siberia. We knew. We knew the politics of that. In Russia at that time, the controlling element, your ass went to Siberia. I saw myself as the sword grinder. That's where that painting came out of. That's the title. I was the Siberian sword grinder. Nobody was paying attention. Nobody was paying attention to those paintings, you know. I mean, luckily, Marcia Tucker came along and she gave me the show at the Whitney. That's another whole story, the history of that. Interesting story. We won't go into the whole thing. But there's a politic to that painting. It's a tough painting. But it came out of tough times.
Well, there are some, just to switch all the way ahead, and then we'll talk about this in relationship to another one that you've just finished. You have a long-standing series of memorial paintings. Do these in some ways reach back to the works from the 60s, or what is your goal with these memorial paintings? What is your thinking about them?
When you lose a loved one, when you lose someone that's important to you, any loss of human life is important. I believe that. Any loss. Whether this person makes 50 cents an hour or whether they make $50 million an hour, which is possible today. Any loss of human life. In the face of death, all of us, we're hopeless. So the memorial paintings grew out of that. I can't play God. That's God. My grandmother would say, you leave that alone. That's God's business. That's what my grandma would say. That's God's business. We have no control over that. At least, though, the minimum we can do. Now, if we go back into history, right, and we study prior civilizations, we find out about those people through how they handled their dead. I promise you. It's how they handled their dead that we find out about what kind of people they were. That's your bottom line. Paintings grew out of that kind of a thinking. I'm a painter. I'm not a politician. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a welfare worker. I'm a painter. I have skills. This is what I can contribute. And I learned that in the hard way. You know, those years down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when I participated in the demonstrations down there and having people throwing shit on you and people bleeding, you don't forget that. That you don't forget. But it's been a hard struggle to realize that the one thing that I have that I can do something is through paint. The memorials came out of that. It's a very straightforward. Nothing weird. It's my taking my hat off. Jane Cortez. Hey, Jane, thank you. Thank you. You taught me something. I learned from you. That's what it came out of.
And how long have you been doing them? It seems like you've been doing them for a number of years. They don't necessarily all take the same form.
I've been doing them since the 60s. Unfortunately, some of the early ones from the 1960s, ironically, were destroyed in fire. There was one for JFK destroyed. My brother Tommy, the jazz musician, who died in a fire in his apartment. He lived for 28 days in intensive care at St. Vincent's. One of the first I did. Again, the experience of total helplessness to go and to watch someone slowly, day by day by day by day, leave you. It started out of that. So they date back to the 60s. But unfortunately, I lost some of the first ones. I've had 2 major fires.
Well, let's move on to this piece. It's a piece you've just finished. The piece Autopolis, you just finished for a show in Belgium.
Yes.
Which is opening this summer. It's a meditation on the works of the Martinican writer Edouard Glissant. What does it reveal about your painting processes and thought processes in 2014 into 2015?
Yeah, the city of Mons, Belgium, was selected by the European Council as the cultural capital of Europe. And there are big expeditions planned for June 2015 coming up. Dirk from the Museum of Contemporary Art in Brussels, Dirk Snornov, invited me to participate. I met Dirk at the museum in Belgium, in Brussels, and he says to me, "You must read Edouard Glissant's work." That's how he said it. He said, not you would be interested. He says, you must read. And I hadn't read his work. But I got back to New York and I realized I knew this man. He was a friend of Jane's. He was a dear friend of Jane's and Mills. And I had met him several times in New York, having dinner with them and hanging out and so forth. And when I read his books for the first time, it occurred to me, what I know the man. Why is it that I never read the books? Anyway, Dirk came up with this term autopolis, and it's taken from the works of Glissant. In truth, it comes from one of his major works, Tout Mode. Now, I have not read Tout Mode because it's never been translated. Mm-hmm. He wrote it in French. Mm-hmm. Poetic Relations, very good book, well worth reading, has been translated. And there was another one that I read of his work. Mm-hmm. I have a background in Greek. I speak Greek. I've lived in Greece on the island of Crete for 44 years. The word interests me. When you break that word down, topos, the meaning of place, polis, city, the alpha is to go against the not of. One could really break that word down into without a place. It fits Glissant. It comes out of his. Now, the word topolis that he's using, it's a contraction. He made it up by piecing it. But the Greek language is very good that way. You can break it down. I remember my professor in Greek used to say to me, he would put a word on the blackboard, and he would say, oh, look at this word. I'm looking at this long thing. And he would see me wincing and going like this. And he would say to me, Jack, you know that word. I said, I've never seen that word before in my life. He says, you know it. And then he would say, take your time. And sure enough, I would break it apart. I says, yes. Same with that word, you know, topolis. So it fits Glissant's writings. He believed in this interconnectedness. He believed in this whole globalness of people and ideas coming from different directions, animate, inanimate, nature, man-made. It was this big dream of his to see all of this stuff coming together. And Dirk, being a very smart guy, picked up on this and saw that this was a perfect setting, a perfect meaning and theme, especially in terms of what's happening in Europe right now. Especially. Europeans are catching a lot of hell now. A lot of stuff that they're experiencing, especially with civil rights and so forth, is stuff that we experienced in the 60s. So we have a big, we did a lot of groundwork that other people are using all over the world today. So it was a very fitting theme. So when he invited me to do this, I jumped on it.
And you made it quite big. I understand this is a very large painting.
Yeah.
Tell us about making it.
It's 10 feet 4 inches by 20 feet 8 inches. And I have built it. When you're working that large, you have to think logistically. You listening, Alex? Alex is my dealer, by the way, in the audience. You have to think logistically. So many times I've had experience in dealing with young painters, and they get excited about doing a big painting. Yeah, great. You know, when you finish it, call me back. I'll come back and take a look at it. I go back to finish this big painting, right? 15 feet, 20 feet. And I look at them. I say, how in the hell are you going to get it out of here? Your doorway is 7 feet. And it's like, oh, I didn't think of that. Sure, in the excitement, one does not think of that. But we all know as painters, you start thinking 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, you got to start thinking logistically. Not only how you're going to get it out of here, how you're going to crate the damn thing and ship it. What has happened to the slab of paints that I developed in 1970 onwards? What happens now is I have learned that that slab of paint can be used as a collage. So this paint is built on the plastic statement of paint as collage. That's what it is. So I make these slabs of paint. I can pick them up, hold them in my hand. It's a very complicated process. It's so complicated In order to deal with it, I apply parallel thinking. I break it up into 3 processes. The first process is construction. The second process is deconstruction. The third process is reconstruction. By breaking it apart with parallel thinking, I can deal with the complexity of it. Geometrically, I allow it either to go toward the fractal, or at times I keep it purely within a Euclidean basis. This one is much more fractal. If I wanted to go more into fractal, where it deals with irregularities, the slab is frozen. I freeze it. When the slab is frozen, I take it out of my freezer. I keep a deep freezer in the studio. In New York, I haven't been paying my Con Ed bill. I don't have to. I can set the damn thing outdoors. It's been 3 degrees, 10 degrees. Leave it out all night, it freezes. It doesn't cost me anything. Hit it with a hammer, it shatters like glass. And once I have all these irregularities, I can build it into a fractal pattern. So plastically, it's built more along those lines. I work with for a whole range. There's a lot of new pigments on the market today. That light is pure aluminum pigment. There's one manufacturer that I use. His name is Kramer from New York, German fellow. He does artist raw materials. That's his thing. He's a scientist. And he makes an aluminum pigment that's 100% pure aluminum. But he has a process where he can grind it down so fine, it's finer than talc. Now, Kramer doesn't make paint. He only makes the raw material. So you have to learn how to use it. The darks in that painting is a relatively new pigment on the market. It's called spindle black. It's a nano pigment, again, extremely fine. But it's the deepest black possible. When Kramer explains it on the ultraviolet light scale, it goes all the way off the chart. Some people claim that this is what they're using on the stealth bombers. They're built to evade radar. It's extremely dense. It sucks in the light. So it's built here light-wise where the spindle is sucking in the light, the aluminum is throwing out the light. So you get this powerful play of light sources between what is being soaked in and what is being reflected. It's a powerful painting, hopefully. It is built for a very site-specific. I was at the site last year to view it. The building is over 40 feet high, the ceilings. It has a bank of wonders on the left, and up above it has a bank of wonders. So this painting is built for a specific wall, a specific place, and it is built to redirect the light, multifaceted. It should work.
I think so. Okay, well, let's open it up to questions from the audience. I know you have been waiting patiently, and I'm going to call on Professor Cherise Smith here with her hand waving.
Oh, yes. No, please continue with the question. I'm just going to repeat it for Jack.
So what he's been describing is both a subjective practice but also a kind of automatic and chance practice at the same time. So I wondered if you could talk about the different aspects of his work.
Sure. Cherise is asking about the subjectivity and chance aspects in the work, and is asking if you can kind of enlighten us about those elements of the work.
But I did hear another word.
Yes, I said chance operations, and I also said automatic painting.
Yeah, automatic painting and chance operations.
Yeah. The automatic is something I totally reject. I'm aware of it, and of course, it's a term that is used for early surrealism. The early surrealists did it. And we have a lot of evidence from Masson, even Lamb, even Motherwell, Ernst. There's a lot of examples of automatic. I reject it. We understand why they did it at the time when fraud was very popular. And the unconscious, the meaning of the unconscious was in the air. Artists reacted to it. They thought that that was the way to go, which was cool at that time. But in today's terminology, the automatic is not good enough. The word random is, though. If we break apart randomness as a study in chaos, we find some amazing things. Things that we thought were totally chaotic, we know that that's not the case. There are patterns out there. And when you do experimentations with randomness, you learn to discover those patterns. And you can learn to use those patterns. The patterns are endless. There's billions of them. I mean, literally billions of them. There's no such thing as one pattern. The subjective part of it comes into the fact that when the human mind views something, the first thing we do is try to make sense of it. All of us. That's what we do. We come across something, it's alien to us, to our beliefs and so forth. We don't know what it is. The first thing we try to do is make sense of it. For the painter, the subjectiveness that comes through the emotions is what allows us to penetrate it. In order to do that, we have to let ourselves go. My background in painting, I come from a tradition whereas we do not separate the conceptual from the perceptual. We don't do that. It was important, though, historically, at one time in history, that someone did that. Hence, we have our early conceptualists. It was important historically that one did that. I could not have done that. It went against my teaching. It was against my beliefs. So I work with what I refer to as 50-50. That's what I call it. The conceptual and the perceptual. It's out of that, though, that's what generates these patterns. I hope that's been of a help.
Other questions? Yes.
Thinking about the alchemy in your work as a painter, I've been to Bessemer and I've been to Birmingham to visit Thorndale and Lonnie Holly and
Yeah.
other artists.
My old good buddy, Thornton.
So I'm wondering if, when I think of those towns, I think of the ironworks and the industry.
You got it, babe.
And I'm wondering if the visuality, the spectacularness of that industry informed you as a kid, if you saw that with an artist's eye, if that feeds you as a painter at all?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In Bessemer, for our high school trips, they didn't take us to the museums. I didn't walk into a museum until I came to New York in 1960. It was not allowed. But they did take us to the steel mills. They took us to the steel mills. I saw the process step by step. They did take us to the coal mines. My daddy was a coal miner. They did take us to the limestone mines. We had areas in Bessemer, if you went to the towns that mined the limestone, they were all white. Other towns that mined the coal, they were all black. Other towns that mined the ore, they were all red. Now, that's why the steel mills came to Bessemer in the first place, because we had the raw material. That's why they came there. Bessemer's ring by all the raw materials is there. I use the word sensibility. My sensibilities were formed there. I know exactly where I came from. I know exactly. I can research it. Thornton Dahl is aware of a lot of that. You know, Thornton always tries to get me to come home. He says to me, Whitten, why don't you come home? I know 30 acres over there you can buy. We can do coon hunting together. He's very much aware of that in the surrounding, you know, in that era. But it's a very good lesson in terms of what informed the artist and where we get our information from. That's for sure.
Yes.
You talk about your earlier life and the indignities that you suffered, pain us all greatly. My question is more of a personal nature rather than artistic. Are you embittered today? Does any of these things survive with you to the point where you're embittered at the white people that discriminated against you?
It would be foolish of me to say that bitterness does not exist. One does not that easily wipe away bitterness. But I made a pact with myself. Coming out of Alabama and what I experienced, and I haven't told you all of it, I realized that there came a point in my life that the decision was mine. I had to decide that. The choice was laid out there. I had to make a choice of what I wanted to do with my life, what kind of person I wanted to be. So I made a pact. I have a painting that dates back 1988. The title of the painting is The Alliance. Like you sign a pact, a contract. I signed a contract. I signed a contract with the universe that I was not going to hate. It's a contract between spirit and matter. That's what it is. That was my decision. So even after all these years and all the experience, and I am the one who have the right to hate. I am the one who have the right to kill. But I don't, because I made a pact with myself that I was not going to live that way. And I suggest to all people, make a contract with the universe how you want to live and what kind of person you want to be. I suggest it to everybody that we do that. Because there's a level out there of being human. That's the only thing we got left. If we destroy that, then we're a bunch of bumbling idiots. We just well be pigs, you know. But without that pact that each one of us have to make with what kind of a people we want to be, I mean, I don't see any hope. I really don't. I made the pact, and I suggested to others to do the same thing.
I think each of us, after examining your work through this talk and your work in Witness, I think we can all agree that I think each of us are certainly have a deeper contract now, I think, with the universe at large and with these events as a whole. We certainly want to thank you and Dr. Jones for your participation, for your passion, and for your involvement with this exhibition. We also especially want to thank the Brooklyn Museum, who's the host of this exhibition. We want to thank all of you for coming. For those of you that have not had the opportunity to see the exhibition, we strongly encourage you to go across the street and check it out. So once again, if you all thank Dr. Jones and Jack Whitten.